Hey, you clicked on my video. Appreciate it. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page. All right, just a couple days away from the LSU-Florida game, and here to preview that matchup is Florida beat reporter Graham Hall of Swamp 247 of 24/7 Sports. Graham, thank you so much for doing this, man. How are you doing today?
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here. This is such a good game every single year. You never know what you're going to get, and previewing it the best we can is all we can do here, because it's, you know what they say, expect the unexpected going in this one, and glad to be here and talk all things this matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my favorite rivalry LSU has, for sure. All right, so we'll get to the biggest story coming out of Gainesville in a minute, as far as one of Florida's best players potentially being out of the game. But first, for those who don't know, and you don't know this either, I covered Billy Napier in Lafayette last season. I worked for a sports radio station there, and I know one thing: he's a good football coach, and he's a great recruiter for sure. But SEC fans are a little bit more critical than Sunbelt fans, obviously, putting it mildly. So, just looking at the coaching side of things on the field, through 6 games, what has kind of left, I guess, Gator fans maybe a little disgruntled with Billy Napier through 6 games, or some things that they've questioned, or some things that maybe they weren't pleased with so far?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to note that this is an in-progress football team coming off a 6-7 finish that really kind of left a little bit to be desired from a experience standpoint coming into the year. So what Billy Napier inherited was a team that was fundamentally raw, but there was talent there, and they lacked a lot of experience to kind of know what to do in game. I think that absolutely was a massive issue, but also you're going from Dan Mullen for everything that, Florida fans could gripe about with him. I think one of the things that you could say about him was that he was a very good offensive play caller. I mean, Emory Jones still, for everything that Emory Jones still needs to work on, of course, he still was able to break the program record for yards in a game, total offense. And Dan Mullen was also the offensive coordinator when Tim Tebow put up that fantastic season in 2007. When he wins the Heisman Trophy in between Florida's national championships there. And I mean, the guy who had more than 4,000 yards that season, you're capable of great plays. And you even saw that last year from Anthony Richardson. We can go back to the LSU matchup last year, how Florida was able to rally from a double-digit deficit and get back into that game. And a lot of that was, I think, a credit to Dan Mullen's offensive play calling. For everything that the defense left to be desired, Florida was often able to stay in those shootout type games because of the creative play calling. And that brings me to my point. When you go from that to the type of offense that Billy Napier likes to run, not a guy to average throughout a game a frenetic pace, someone who is comfortable running the football at a high rate, 55 to 60% of the time. And when they get to the second half with a lead, is comfortable running the clock and continuing to pound the run rather than trying to pull away from the opposition necessarily and get into a game where you've kind of hit that close to 45, 50 point mark by the fourth quarter, which is just something I think a lot of people desire from an offensive football perspective. For everything that you can say about Billy Napier for winning close games, some of those games are a little bit too comfortable for a lot of people who would like to see him put the opponent away. So I think that's one of the gripes that I've heard the most about, not to use that word again. I think that most people reach out and say, we're not blowing out opponents that we should. Florida was a double-digit favorite against USF and Missouri, and both those games were one-possession games. And you go back to last year, even though they win double-digit games there in Louisiana, I think there were a lot of games that were very close there. So I think that when it comes to Billy Napier's play calling and his improvement, I think a lot of people would like to see a little more explosion in Florida, be able to do the things that he talks about, develop players, be able to get younger guys in to get some experience. And the way to do that is to make it so that the game is out of reach by the fourth quarter. And Florida really hasn't been able to do that outside of one game this season against Eastern Washington. And you did see them get 81 players in the game. So the two things to assess through 6 games for Florida certainly are a little bit more dynamic from an offensive perspective, play calling, and for Florida to be able to get some of those younger guys in the game. That certainly is something that people would like to see here after 6 games.
Yeah, Billy likes to run the football for sure. Always has. So we know the strength of this Florida team is definitely their running game for sure, and that starts with not only their good running backs but their offensive line. One of the best, really, in the SEC, in my opinion, and maybe their best offensive lineman, transfer from Louisiana Lafayette, Osiris Torrance. He was named questionable on Wednesday by Billy Napier. So, what's the update on that situation?
Yeah, this is a guy who wasn't able to participate fully in practice. He was out there in practice yesterday. He was in a non-contact jersey, from what I've been told by several people who were at practice. He has a brace on one of his knees, to my understanding. How significant that is, from what I've seen from him, he still had good mobility, but obviously when you get into a game, it's hard to, I think that's a better indicator than just seeing someone move around in a practice setting. So certainly I think that how he feels from a pain management standpoint heading into that game is going to be a huge factor. But he has been able to participate in practice. It's not 100%. He has been doing a whole lot of contact work. One of the good things that I think Florida would tell you is that they have focused a lot on the offensive line from when Billy Napier first got on campus. I think that you can go back to the hiring of 2 offensive line coaches without having a quarterbacks coach was a sign that they were really going to go all in on building up the offensive line. And along with getting Osiris Torrance, this unit has kind of said that they feel like they're 6, 7 deep and have guys who are capable of playing. You look at the left side of that line, 3 returning starters in Richard Garage, Ethan White, and Kingsley Egwakon. And then you look at Osiris Torrance, the impact transfer from Louisiana, and what he's done starting every game and playing in a lot of games every single snap. Really, the question mark for much of the season was right next to him. It was at right tackle. Florida lost its starting right tackle in the second game of the season, in the first quarter of the second game of the season. Michael Tarquin, that's a fourth-year guy who had started at the end of last year. So really, they were returning 4 starters from last year with Osiris Torrance. But in the time since Michael Tarquin went down, you saw Austin Barber, kind of a younger guy, but an absolute dominant blocker, step in, and really Florida's offensive line didn't miss a beat there with him at right tackle. And now heading into this game, yes, Osiris Torrance is limited, but Florida has Tarquin back, and Barber is playing at such a high rate that I think we could see some interesting things along the offensive line if Osiris Torrance perhaps is not able to go, or if he's only able to play a limited amount of snaps rather than the full load that you've seen out of him throughout much of the season. Austin Barber is a guy that is capable of playing left tackle, right tackle. They have a couple guys that they feel comfortable who could switch guard spots, but maybe they see Richie Leonard in there at right guard, or maybe they move Barber around along with Tarquin on that right side of the offensive line. It's going to be very interesting to watch if Florida is able to have seamless offensive line play, considering the situation with Torrance, but they have depth at the position, and it's going to be something to watch on Saturday.
How has the development of Anthony Richardson gone under Napier?
That's a good question. I just mentioned that Florida doesn't have a quarterbacks coach, and that really kind of puts all the pressure on the coach who is making that decision, right? So Billy Napier, he may not be directly overseeing every aspect of his development, but he's tasking the analysts with doing it, having guys who are working with him who aren't one of those 10 assistants on the field. That's really what Florida has done. And I think that can kind of increase maybe the criticism when you don't see the strides from Richardson that many people were expecting. I mean, as I mentioned, you go back to that LSU game last year, I think there were a lot of people in that stadium who felt that this was a guy who had Heisman Trophy capabilities if he continued progressing. I think that seeing him not fully have that linear development that many people are looking for has kind of raised some of those questions about his development, of course, and also the help that he's receiving within the Florida program, because many people would like to, I think, see him be at a little bit higher level than what he is right now. But as for what he currently needs to work on, I kind of will give you my assessment. Again, I'm no absolute professional, but from what I've gathered, with Richardson, he's a guy who is prone to using his legs to escape the pocket, right? So when you do that, you need to set your feet when you make the throw, or you need to be an incredibly accurate quarterback, or else those balls are going to get picked off, or you're going to have some errant throws, or the receiver's just not looking because they're not looking for you to set their feet. For Richardson, he needs to continue to work on his footwork, on his throws, And when he is going through design pass plays, I think he needs to continue getting more comfortable going through his progressions. He's made some strides this season already, but still a little bit too often zeroes in on his primary target, his first read there. Needs to continue also to, I think, work on improving his deep throw accuracy. When you talk about all those things, it may sound like he's a little bit farther off than he really is, but we're talking about a day and age where quarterbacks are picked apart and the ceiling, in my opinion, is higher. And that means the floor has been elevated, because no longer are you branded as a accurate quarterback if you're going out there completing 55% of your throws. But if you go back to the 80s, when guys like, Marino were playing, you complete 58, 60% of your throws, you're darn good. So right now, I think that, we're a little bit overly critical of guys like Anthony Richardson, and a lot of quarterbacks in the SEC, I think, are victims to that, because what we expect has been elevated, and that's kind of the standard that guys are held to right now.
So Florida's defense, they're probably, they have bigger problems than the offense for sure, but so does LSU's offense. So it's kind of a bad on bad, I guess you could say. But where do you think LSU can have the most success? Or let me ask it a different way, actually. What part of LSU's offense can give Florida's defense the most problems from what you've seen from LSU?
I mean, it's got to be Jaden Daniels' ability to escape outside the pocket, beat you with his legs as well, but also do some things that are just consistently unpredictable in a sense. I mean, this is a Florida defense this year, and even going back to last year, this isn't a new problem, but this is a Florida defense that this year has kind of had a penchant for missed assignments, mistakes, blown coverages. I mean, I think if you go back, a mutual opponent between Florida and LSU right now, Tennessee, I think that both teams, and maybe this speaks to the prowess of Tennessee actually, but I think both teams could make a case that they made a lot of mistakes against that Tennessee offense, that there's a very slim margin for error against them. That was a huge issue for Florida. That's why they had to keep up with that Tennessee performance that saw Hendon Hooker have more than 100 rushing yards and complete 22 of 28 throws. They have blown some assignments this year. It's even called for, the benching from a Florida fan perspective, of course, for fifth-year senior safety Trey Dean, who I thought actually had a pretty good game against Missouri this last week. So if one of these offenses, especially if Jaden Daniels can make the throws and play turnover-free football, which he has done, I think, at a pretty high rate this season compared to how he finished last year, especially with I believe 10 interceptions. If he can do that and kind of take advantage of the mistakes that are going to show up, in my opinion, I think LSU can absolutely capitalize on what Florida's defense is currently struggling with and what they're trying to overcome in this new scheme under Patrick Toney, and with a lot of inexperienced personnel. I just mentioned a fifth-year guy in Trey Dean, but otherwise you're talking about a defensive back group that is relying on a lot of underclassmen, a defensive back in Jaden Hill, who hasn't played in more than a year after his great performance this past Saturday. Jason Marshall is a second-year guy. You have a lot of inexperience at linebacker outside of Ventrell Miller. This is a Florida defense that, it can't all be blamed, I think, on the new scheme and the unfamiliarity with it all. They also have a lot of inexperience there, and that's something that LSU absolutely can capitalize if Jaden Daniels can hit his receivers in stride. And you certainly know there that you guys got some talented wideouts in Baton Rouge.
Yeah. It's just about, getting them the ball and them getting comfortable, which has been pulling, LSU fans been pulling their hair out about that all season. But who knows? Maybe that happens Saturday. We'll see. Graham, thank you so much for doing this, man. You were great. I really appreciate this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in the description link below.